Thank you for being with us tonight. Hour 3 of Stacy on the Right here on SiriusXM's Patriot channel. Welcoming into the program, back from the UK Daily Mail, Victoria Churchill, U.S. political reporter for the Daily Mail covering Capitol Hill, Young Voices contributor. And thank you so much, Victoria, for coming back on.
Thank you so much for having me, Stacy. Always great to be back with you.
It's great to have you here, especially on this. This has been, we've mostly been involving ourselves with tributes to Charlie Kirk and also kind of talking about the details such as they are about the shooter and just exposing things that we know. I am aware of the coverage that Candace Owens has been providing. She certainly knew Charlie Kirk very well, had a deep and long-lasting friendship with him. She also, obviously Turning Point was a huge part of her beginning and being known in conservative politics. And she helped to grow the organization through the speaking tours that she engaged in. She was at Charlie Kirk's side for years. Then she met her husband, they married, and of course she launched her own organizations and her own podcast and went to the Daily Wire after PragerU. And so, their paths diverged, but apparently there still was some friendship there. I've watched some videos over the weekend of Charlie Kirk talking about his disagreements on some very important issues with Candace, but that their friendship remains strong and that, people can disagree and still be friends. And so with that in mind, I did watch the video. It was her podcast where she was talking about Bill Ackman, hedge fund investor, quite famous for his political viewpoints and especially came to prominence as someone we would know as a household name during COVID. In his pushback on the lockdowns, and now he's very politically active. And there was an accusation that threats were made against Charlie Kirk by Israel supporters and even Bill Ackman himself. He has since come out and said that that not only isn't true, but Andrew Colvett has commented, and so he has a lot of people backing him up as to what the substance of that meeting was with the influencers at Charlie Kirk's behest, with Bill Ackman hosting at his home in the Hamptons. So bring us up to date. What do we need to know here about Candace Owens and her accusations against Bill Ackman?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on to talk about this very important topic. As you point out, Charlie and Candace ran in the same circles for years. At least the way that I view it, Charlie is really the first person who gave Candace a big platform. But, as you pointed out, their paths diverged. And so when I had first heard about this accusation, the exact line from Candace was that threats were made by Bill Ackman and that it was a sort of intervention in the Hamptons. This was a meeting that took place just weeks before Charlie's death, of course, his assassination. And, I have sources who I cited in my work at the Daily Mail who were there, who were at that Hamptons meeting, who very much disagreed with Candace's portrayal of events, and also not only Candace's, but this meeting was first reported on in an outlet called The Gray Zone. They tend to be pretty leftist, but pretty anti-war, and so kind of that just puts them opposed to Israel just because of the nature of their work. And so I was very interested to read their account, and again, kind of as I was reading through it, I was like, well, I know some of these people, so some of these people that were mentioned in the Gray Zone article. And so, I decided to do my own reporting, to do my own digging, talk to my own sources, and really look at this element from two things. First of all, I wanted to hear about the meeting, but I also wanted to show that Charlie really had a lifelong, or at least as long as he has had Turning Point, time of supporting not only Israel, but the Jewish people. Jewish conservatives, always welcomed them to his events. He hosted the Young Jewish Leadership Summits on at least 3 occasions, as I could tell, just from Facebook pages that I could see pop up, and even tweets and, speaker lists and things that, of course, Turning Point promotes all the time for all of their events. And, kind of, I think before they started doing, now they have America Fest, but before it was Student Action Summit was their big summit in Florida, and then they had all of these kind of micro niche summit. So they had not only the Young Jewish Leadership Summit, but they also had a Young Latino Leadership Summit and Young Black Leadership Summit. Again, kind of engaging these communities that are not necessarily a part of what most people would historically think of as a Republican base, as a conservative base. And so I decided to do some calling, people in my Rolodex, and, a lot of these people were actually people that were kind of, I guess, one level of separation outside of my inner circle, and also people that had run in these turning point circles for a number of years. And, I found that Candace's and also the Gray Zone's portrayal of events was warped at best. And so kind of what had really happened, and again, some of these people who talked with me have spoken out publicly, other people that were at this meeting, which was pitched to them as the Save the West retreat, was kind of a collection or a consortium of online voices that was brought together by Charlie in the Hamptons, that dated a number of locations, but it was really pitched as kind of, a way for him to hear what leading voices on the right, on the center right, because, I don't know if you pointed this out in your intro, but, Bill Ackman historically was a leftist. And then, as you pointed out, during COVID, he became somebody who sided with the right on a lot of issues. And, ultimately he backed President Trump in the 2024 election. But historically, he, hasn't been a conservative. And so I think the inclusion of Ackman in particular in this case is interesting. Kind of really just going to show that, Charlie was willing to welcome people into his orbit who did not agree with him on most issues, but, if he could find common ground with them, he was willing to kind of entertain them. But, again, even other major voices like, Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly, who we've since heard, he had backlash for including them in some of his events. He was willing to do that. He was willing to have Turning Point be that place of debate. I think maybe in a way, maybe kind of a replacement for, even what CPAC used to be quite a number of years ago, right? CPAC used to be somewhere that conservatives and libertarians and really anybody in the center-right orbit could come. And I think Turning Point, in a way, became that place, I would say probably maybe even in lieu of what CPAC has historically been. But again, just back to that meeting.
Well, if I could just,
I don't know if you mentioned agree with that portrayal, but
no, I think your analysis is sound. When you mentioned CPAC, so CPAC is traditionally speaking what an outsider would say. Oh, it looks like Student Action Summit and the Turning Point USA events have kind of replaced CPAC. Not really replaced. And not supplanted, but it's like a different group of people going there, right? So the same people who go to CPAC are still going to CPAC, but younger people are going to Student Action Summit. Younger people are going to Turning Point. So some of those same young people might go to CPAC, but over time, especially the last 3 or 4 years, I think we've definitely seen a shift away from CPAC and towards Student Action Summit and the other Turning Point events. So in a calendar, if you had to decide, am I going to spend $950 to get all access into CPAC, or am I going to go to SAS? A lot of people would say, no, all my friends are going to be at SAS, right? The younger people. The kind of old guard, they're going to CPAC. And CPAC's still relevant because President Trump spoke there, right? You have the major voices in the conservative movement still speaking at CPAC. But what happens in the future, like next year, which of the events, actually I think there's one more event this year for Turning Point, and they're not slowing down at all. That's going to be the real test. I mean, Victoria, the numbers are going to paint a picture of either the ascendancy of Turning Point's end of year event as a replacement, as you originally described. I haven't seen it as a replacement so far, but I think it could turn into that because of what's happened. And because, people want to make a statement, they want to be a part of the movement that has been created and has now exploded because of the assassination of Charlie. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I can't pretend to predict, but certainly there's a lot of momentum for Turning Point with, over 100,000 people requesting new chapters, 120,000 new chapter requests. Since Charlie Kirk was assassinated. So it's an interesting dynamic. But you were talking about this meeting. I read some of in fact, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name, but he's a black influencer. He has blonde hair and he's very, very funny, but also very pointed in his analysis. he said he was at the meeting and he did a video about it and said, look, there were no threats. We were there to debate each other about topics that have to do with Israel. And he wanted to hear all of our thoughts. So it was a wide range of opinions. And the Gray Matter podcast guy, I think he was there as well. So it wasn't a hey, let's bring Charlie to the carpet type of meeting. It was Charlie inviting them there so that they could debate. And that's what he said. But I know you have some people you spoke to. So, back to you. What do you see that happened here?
Yeah, so Xavier Duriceau, I believe, who you're talking about, he was actually one of the people that went on the record with me for my story, and others, I think wanted to tell me, but didn't necessarily want their names kind of disassociated with the controversy. And so, of course, as a journalist, I have to, keep my sources good and, hopefully use them for other future work. And so, but yeah, Xavier was one of the people that went on the record about this. And yeah, you're absolutely right, is that this is a meeting that was set up by Charlie, not necessarily an intervention as it has been portrayed in some other places. But what I think is important is that, at least from the accounts that I have heard, is that this meeting, again, really wanted to run the gamut of every single hot button issues that, again, these influencers are engaging with people on a daily basis, and that Israel was a very small part of that. And that even kind of the session that they had with Bill Ackman, Israel was a very small portion of that discussion as well. He wanted to talk about the socialist takeover. He wanted to talk about Zoran Mandami's ascendancy in New York City, because that's where Ackman is based. And, as somebody that does business, that is something that is a very high concern for him. And so I think kind of Candace's poll that, Ackman was there because he's Jewish and all he wanted to do was talk about Israel, I think that's misrepresented based on my reporting. And, again, I think that's notable, is that, I talked to a number of people that were there that day, or I guess it was over a course of a couple days, that this was really a meeting of the minds, I think it was how one person described it to me, and that they wanted to talk about literally every single hot button issue under the sun. Now, of course, Israel's included in that because it very much is, I think consistently it has been a very hot button topic for many people that are engaged in political discourse, particularly on the right. And of course, over the past couple of years, in particular, since October 7th, and, since seeing what the U.S.'s level of involvement is. And of course, that's again, that's a very hot debate on the right. And I think regardless of what you think of different intricacies within Turning Point, within Charlie's movement, that's one thing that I think everybody agrees on, is that he was willing and able to have that debate, and also willing to hear out other voices on a variety of topics, including Israel. And I don't know if you caught Andrew Colvett's interview that he did. It was released earlier today with Alex Clark. She's also a Turning Point host on her podcast. And, I think Andrew was very clear in that Charlie has always been a supporter of Israel, of the Jewish people, but, he thought Israel's PR, especially in the war, wasn't great. And, maybe he got some pushback on that from a couple people, but, that's kind of where Andrew drew the line, is that at the end, Charlie was there for the debate, and that's, I think, something that everybody that has ever seen him do anything agrees with, and I think that makes sense to a lot of people.
It does make sense. And, Megyn Kelly also spoke about this on her program. She was talking about the fact that Charlie Kirk had some difficult questions about some of the things that were being put out in the media. Not that he was turning against Israel, but that he felt he had to ask those questions because he wanted to be a strong defender, and that it's okay to ask questions, right? Just asking questions shouldn't be enough to get anyone shut down or pushed away. And she was saying that the questions, they actually had them on her program. Now, I didn't see that episode where they were discussing Israel and any questions they had, but I saw her recent program where she was discussing the fact that, Charlie Kirk was very much his own person, and that he wouldn't have been bullied by Bibi Netanyahu, and that the assertion that somehow there was some kind of bad blood or animus there was just ludicrous. My concern is, because, people give a lot of validity to what Candace Owens says because she is a huge part, she was a huge part of Turning Point. She was a very good friend to Charlie Kirk. For years, they traveled the world together, going to Israel and all kinds of different places. And she was still a Turning Point speaker. They had an event last year. I don't remember if it was SAS or one of the other, or AmeriFest, but she was one of the speakers then. This is in 2024. So this is the idea that somehow their friendship had, suffered an irreparable crack isn't true. I saw a video of Charlie Kirk talking. Someone asked him, how do you feel about Candace Owens' comments on, I don't remember what the specifics were. And he said, well, as with any friend, he said, Candace remains a good friend. We differ on any number of issues, and some of them we differ quite strenuously on, but she remains a good friend, and I want to see her do well. He went as far as to say she's a great wife and mother. He was talking about, her parenting, because she has now, a fourth child, a little baby. So I think when I watch what she has to say, obviously she's doing one of those investigative things where she says, I see patterns, and then she starts pointing to different things that may or may not be related. And her audience is enthralled with it. But Andrew Colvett and other trusted sources are actually seriously contradicting her.
Yeah, they definitely are. And actually, in my article that I wrote up about this, it was the People's Convention. I included that there's a photograph of her speaking in 2024. So, this is Turning Point's event kind of along with, or, maybe even secondarily to the RNC, kind of their way of getting people involved. Of course, Turning Point's all about the grassroots and getting grassroots involved. So that was their way of, bringing together, again, top voices on the right. And yeah, I actually know that exact clip that you were talking about. I've seen it floating around on my feed as well. And, again, I think this goes to underscore that, Charlie as a human being, from those who know him, who I've talked to, and, I saw him on a number of occasions over probably close to the past decade. But I was not at all close with him. I just ran in the same circles as him and crossed paths with him maybe once or twice. But, again, I think really more in this day and age than ever, you need friends who you disagree with. Some of my closest friends probably don't agree with me politically, but, we can still have civil conversations and we can still have civil discussions. And, I think I can relate. I know exactly what Charlie's talking about in that clip when he says, I think even in a way your friendships are a little bit stronger, and, maybe even your debates and disagreements are healthier when you have that kind of mutual understanding that you have a friendship with this person, you have a mutual respect for this person. Actually in that Andrew Colvett and Alex Clark clip, Colvett talks about an interview that Charlie did with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, now HHS secretary, and, this is actually something that was brought up during the memorial, was just how powerful Charlie was at bringing people together, and how he was somebody that brought together RFK Jr. and the Maha Coalition with President Trump. I think, according to what a lot of people think, was really a key factor in Trump's victory electorally in 2024, was that, they were willing to have these debates. And when they're recording this podcast, Charlie, this was, I think maybe before RFK was officially running for president. This was, I think, Colvett had said in December of 2023. Charlie goes, I respect the hell out of you, Bobby, but let's have these disagreements. And, again, I think that just really goes to underscore that he was willing to have those debates, have those discussions, and that will be Charlie's lasting legacy. And, that's something that seems to have resonated with millions of people, not only in the U.S., but across the world. Colvett was also talking about how in Charlie's last days, he was in South Korea and Japan, engaging with people all the way over there, and, spreading not only Christianity, but, conservatism, and again, just that idea of free speech, free debate, free discussion. And that, that obviously seems to have resonated with people. I was at that memorial service in Arizona this past weekend. It was absolutely beautiful. But again, it was people of all, colors, religions, races. There was a photograph that I saw going around on the internet, and I saw this firsthand. There was Jewish men in the floor seats, and, those floor tickets were people that were in the Turning Point orbit somehow, either former staff, of course, lots of members of the administration, top celebrities, The Aldeans were there, Grant Cardone and his wife were there. So all kinds of people, again, just really anybody from the center-right orbit, they were all there. They were all there to pay their respects. And, again, that I think just goes to show how great his legacy really is.
I think so, too. I watched from the airport. We were flying back from Boston. And I have to tell you, the praise and worship that they engaged in was so genuine and so sweet. And it was heart-wrenching, but also very uplifting. And it felt like a relief to hear all of those voices, 100,000 people singing in unison when they dropped the music, and it was just the voices rising up. I couldn't believe how beautiful it was and how it meant something to the people who were watching. They really connected with it. I saw a lot of comments about people saying that the music made them cry and they didn't understand why. They felt, the need to cry during the music, and that they missed the singing. They didn't realize how much they'd missed singing. And there were just lots of comments about people saying that they'd gone to church for the first time since Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and that they'd forgotten how welcoming it was, or all the same people are at church. And there were just all these comments not comments I expected. I expected to see a few people say, oh, I'm thinking about going to church. Not that they went and they'd already been and they'd had these experiences. And so it's been really impactful. But I do feel like, I hate to say it, but I do feel like Candace Owens' comments haven't really helped anything. Treating this whole thing like it's an expose that needs to be, kind of worked through in the style of her podcast. I get that that's what she does on her show, but I mean, this is not that. And so there's just something weird about her, accusing Bill Ackman, and then he came back at her and very, very strongly said, look, I didn't confront him. There was nothing to confront him about. It was just a meeting. He was the organizer. He's the one who invited everyone. I just provided the venue. I guess I have to go back and check and see if she ever acknowledged that Bill Ackman had completely repudiated what she said about the meeting being adversarial. But, he really did come back pretty strongly on that.
He definitely did. And, I think I would agree with you that it hasn't been helpful because, again, I mean, I don't know if you saw, but this is a story that we ran at the Daily Mail. Donald Trump and Elon Musk reconciled at Charlie's memorial. Those two had been at loggerheads with each other really for the past couple of months. Of course, since their kind of, I guess, breakup is how I believe
the people called it that and so many other things, Victoria. I think that's a kind way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, all of these people said, regardless of our disagreements, regardless of our stances, this is about Charlie and his legacy. And, frankly, I think Candace is one of the people that has not portrayed it that way.
It's not been helpful. I love that you brought that up because that was just one of the great things about the memorial. You know how it is when you're in the airport, you're trying to, basically, you try to get something to eat, and then you have to move from where you're eating to the gate. And you can't forget. You can't just sit there and lose track of time. So we were moving down to the gate and around the time when they were panning around the arena, and I saw Elon Musk. They were like, Elon Musk is in the room. And so, they were showing him, and he was waving, and people were coming up to him and saying hi. And it crossed my mind so briefly, will he possibly be in the same, area as President Trump? And I know they'd had some, exchange of back and forth, but not a full-blown reconciliation, right? So then later, I got to come back to it because I couldn't get my internet working on the plane. Normally, you just pay $8 and you can have it, but mine didn't work. And so I made it back home, got into the house with my luggage, and then turned it back on and was listening to the speeches, and they showed just a brief moment, like 2 minutes. Elon Musk comes in, sits behind the bulletproof glass next to President Trump. President Trump pats him on the leg, which is, between men, that's a show of friendship. Like that's, you don't just pat any old dude on the leg. And then they kind of nodded to each other and they exchanged comments, and I could tell that they were having a discussion. And I thought, isn't this beautiful? Because Charlie Kirk was one of many. I said it on my show. I said, I think they're going to reconcile. Charlie Kirk said it on his show. And then here they are together. And I just thought it was a beautiful thing. So I'm glad you're highlighting that because I hadn't really pointed that out. There was so much to like take in of the people all being there together from Turning Point, the White House, et cetera. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely one that's very interested to see how that relationship continues to grow and develop, or see if they've just appeared in public together, and if that's kind of the end of it. I think a few weeks ago on some show or some interview that Musk was doing, he said ever since he left being a special employee at DOGE, of course, the Department of Government Efficiency under Trump, that he hadn't been to D.C. And so, I'm interested to see if that'll change. And of course, during Trump's budget bill passage, Elon was one of the ones who backed the likes of Rand Paul and Thomas Massie kind of against Trump, which of course did not help their fractures and their divisions. And, of course, the Epstein files, which Congress may be releasing in the next few days. That's another element that those two have definitely disagreed on. So we'll be interested to see if that reunification was just for the cameras or if that's genuine at all.
I think it's kind of genuine, but we have to remember with Doge, Elon Musk was experiencing some serious bad numbers with Tesla while he was running Doge. So he's been gone and he's been out of the limelight, and Tesla's stock is way up. It's back up in the stratosphere. It's growing again. And there's all these new developments they're expecting to roll out that have to do, I mean, obviously it's all speculation, but there are all these investor type newsletters and things that are talking about Tesla's AI leaps and bounds and new things, new products, new offerings that they're going to have. And that is all contingent upon the brain power and creativity of Elon Musk. So he's been very busy, not working on Doge, but instead working on Tesla, and it's paying off. And I like seeing it because the innovation that he brings to Tesla could one day be something that solves problems in other areas, because that's how technology usually works. So I think it's really exciting. I do think that he and President Trump are going to work together again. They have to. President Trump's the president, and he is, leading on reusable rockets and innovating. I mean, just to say reusable rockets is such an understatement of all of the impact that Elon Musk has on American business and technology. So I'm very excited to see the two of them working together again.
I am too. It'll be interesting to of course, Elon's got his investments, his companies, his technologies, which definitely bring in a lot of government contracts. But of course, the political side will be interesting. I'm actually in Kentucky this week with Rand and Massie. They're going to be crisscrossing over the next 2 days, and I get to follow along with them. So that's my next storyline that I'm chasing in my work at the Daily Mail. And, I think it'll be interesting to see what Kentuckians tell them about, of course, they both opposed Trump's budget bill, which first was called the Big Beautiful Bill. Now it's being called the Working Families Tax Credit. That's the GOP's official rebrand. So I'm interested to see on how that hits with, their voters, their supporters, and people all over the great state of Kentucky, where I'll be spending my next couple of days and doing lots of great reporting for the Daily Mail.
I can't wait to see your reporting, Victoria. We love it when you take time out from gathering the news and talking to sources to join us here on the show and give us your insider viewpoint. I hope if there's any new development, especially with what's going on with Candace Owens and the thing is, I can't discount her, Victoria, because she really was a part of the beating heart of Turning Point for a long time. But then on the other hand, I feel like she's taken some hits on her credibility because Bill Ackman completely denied her presentation of how things went down. And she wasn't there. So, he has a little bit more credibility on what happened at a meeting that he hosted as opposed to her research or whatever she's calling it. So I'm hoping that it all works out well and that the rhetoric calms down. But I know we can count on you to bring us the latest, and I hope you'll come back and share more with us as you learn it.
Of course, Stacy, definitely will. Thank you so much for having me. Always great to be back with you.
It's great to have you back. Stay safe out there on the trail, and I can't wait to hear more about your work with Massie and Paul, learning about what they're up to. Victoria Churchill, U.S. political reporter for the UK Daily Mail. Find her articles at dailymail.co.uk. Thanks, Victoria. All right, we'll be back.